It started like any other Wednesday. Bright skies, the sound of sprinklers hissing in sync, the distant hum of lawn mowers, and the sharp scent of freshly cut grass carried through our peaceful little cul-de-sac. I was inside finishing a work call when I heard the front door open and shut gently. A few seconds later, Lila's voice rang through the house, confused and cautious. "Dad?" she called. I stepped into the hallway just in time to see her holding a crumpled piece of paper, her brows knitted together in disbelief. "What's this?" she asked, handing it to me. The moment my eyes scanned the letterhead, HOA Executive Committee, Final Notice of Eviction, my heart dropped. I read it twice before it sank in. This wasn't a notice for me or for our family. It was directed specifically at my daughter. Eviction proceedings for unauthorized residency of a non-homeowner minor adult, it said, cold and clinical. I blinked. Lila, my 17-year-old daughter, born and raised in this very house, was now being told she had no right to live here. I looked at her, barefoot, still in her school hoodie, backpack dangling from one shoulder, and I felt a quiet rage start to burn in my chest. "This can't be real," I muttered, but it was stamped, signed, and apparently already filed, with the HOA board. The name at the bottom? Judith Harrington, HOA President. Judith was infamous in our neighborhood. Sharp suits, tighter rules, and an even tighter smile. She moved in 5 years ago and quickly assumed the role of HOA President, turning what was once a friendly, loosely organized group into a rigid machine of regulation and enforcement. Her favorite weapon was the clipboard. She carried it like a sheriff's badge, knocking on doors, citing violations as if she were leading a crusade. At first, it was small things: trash cans out too early, holiday lights overstaying their welcome, garden gnomes violating uniform aesthetic. But recently, it had escalated. I'd heard whispers at barbecues and parent meetings. Judith had a problem with teenagers. Too loud, she said. Too aimless, she'd claim. Loitering near community spaces. But now she wasn't just complaining. She was trying to kick my daughter out of her own home. That evening, after I calmed Lila down and assured her she wasn't going anywhere, I started making phone calls. I contacted Mike across the street. He'd had a similar run-in with Judith last month after his 16-year-old son hosted a quiet study group. Then I spoke to Elena 2 blocks down. Her niece had been cited for walking her dog too close to the HOA office trailer. One by one, the stories emerged like cracks in pavement. Judith wasn't enforcing rules. She was weaponizing them, and teens were her targets. I checked the HOA charter, flipping through page after page of vague language and outdated clauses. Nowhere did it state that a minor child living with their legal guardian could be deemed unauthorized. But Judith had twisted a loophole, Clause 8.3a. Unregistered residents over the age of 16 must be declared and approved by the HOA board. It was meant to catch long-term visitors or secret tenants. She was using it on a 17-year-old girl, my daughter. Lila tried to laugh it off that night, but I could tell it rattled her. She sat quietly at the dinner table, poking at her food. "Do you think she's just doing this to scare us?" she asked softly. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe this was just a mistake, a formality, an overreach that would resolve itself. But deep down, I knew better. Judith didn't scare people by accident. She did it by design. 2 days later, a second letter arrived, this time certified mail. Notice of non-compliance. Failure to address prior notification will result in formal proceedings and daily fines. I had had enough. I marched down to the HOA office, a converted sunroom attached to Judith's house, complete with security, cameras, and a keypad entry. She was inside, of course. Her desk lined with manila folders, her laptop open to what looked like spreadsheets of homeowner compliance reports. "Mr. Sanders," she greeted me without looking up. "How can I help?" You today? I held up the eviction letter. You can start by explaining this. She took it, glanced at it with a practiced frown, then folded her hands. I'm simply enforcing the bylaws. Your daughter is 17. She's not a dependent minor according to the updated regional guidelines, and her presence here was never officially disclosed to the board. I stared at her. She's my daughter. She's lived here her whole life. Judith smiled, that patronizing, lawyer-ready smile that says you're already losing. That may be, but according to Section 8.3a, all residents over 16 must be declared and approved. This isn't personal, Mr. Sanders, it's procedural. But it was personal. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't about regulations. It was about control. Judith wanted to dictate not just how we lived, but who could live here. And that's when I realized something deeper. This wasn't just about Lila. Judith had drawn a line, and she was pushing out anyone who didn't fit her narrow vision of community perfection. And teenagers? With their music, their voices, their presence? They didn't fit. The next day, a bright yellow violation flag was planted in our yard. HOA policy infraction, it said. Non-compliant household status. Lila saw it when she came home and froze. They're putting us on display now, she said, voice low. I nodded. We're not backing down. That night, I gathered every notice, every email, every recording I had from neighbors, and began compiling it into a digital file. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, lawyer, media, city council, but I knew this had to be documented. Lila helped me. She wasn't just scared anymore, she was furious. Why does she hate us so much? She asked as she scanned and labeled files. She doesn't hate us, Lila, I said. She hates anyone she can't control. The final straw came 2 days later. Lila came home early from school, upset. Apparently, someone had called the school claiming to be concerned about her safety at home. A counselor pulled her aside for questioning. They thought maybe you were forcing me to stay in a place where I wasn't welcome, she told me. Someone told them I was being mistreated. I sat down heavily. There was only one person who would do something that manipulative. It was Judith's move, a scare tactic designed to force our hand. But she had gone too far. Now it was more than harassment. It was defamation. It was slander. As Lila sat next to me, her knees pulled up to her chest, I put an arm around her and said the words I hadn't fully admitted to myself until that moment. We're going to fight this. And we're going to win. Because this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about dignity, about family, about the right to exist without someone like Judith turning your home into a war zone. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't yet know about the neighbors who would rise to support us, or the unexpected ally who would arrive in the form of a federal badge. But I knew one thing for certain. Judith Harrington had picked the wrong family to bully. The sun hadn't even reached its peak that Thursday morning when Judith Harrington made her entrance, marching up our driveway like she was on some kind of mission from God, clipboard clutched to her chest like a holy relic. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, sprayed into place with the kind of precision that hinted at obsession, and her lips were so tightly pursed it looked painful. Lila was sitting on the front porch swing, headphones in, a paperback novel in her lap, the gentle creak of the swing's chain mixing with the chirps of morning birds. Judith didn't knock. She didn't call out politely. She stood square at the foot of the porch and barked like a drill sergeant. "Young lady!" Lila jumped, yanking out her earbuds. "You are in direct violation of Homeowners Association. Bylaw 8.3a. You have until Friday to vacate the premises or face formal intervention." My daughter looked stunned, confused, and a little embarrassed. I came out just in time to see Judith flipping pages on her clipboard as if preparing for court. I stood between them. "She's my daughter," I said, keeping my voice even. "She has every right to live here." Judith barely looked at me. "That's not how the bylaws are interpreted," she replied smugly. "We don't allow delinquent youth or unregistered adult minors to reside here without board approval. Your household is now considered non-compliant. I took a step closer. Lila has done nothing wrong. She's 17. She lives with her father. There is nothing unlawful or unethical about that. Judith's voice rose a pitch. This neighborhood has standards. We do not permit loitering, noise pollution, or unsupervised minors disrupting the atmosphere of safety we've built here. As she spoke, neighbors started appearing. Behind blinds, through half-cracked doors, lingering at the ends of their driveways, pretending to water plants or check mail. They watched like an audience waiting for a fight to break out. Judith didn't care. In fact, I think she relished it. She was playing to the crowd, her words growing more venomous with each breath. If she's not removed by Friday, you will be fined daily. If the problem continues, we will escalate it to private enforcement and seek a legal order of removal. I nearly laughed. Private enforcement? Are you threatening to send security guards to remove my daughter from her own porch? She smiled thinly. The HOA reserves that right under emergency compliance protocols. Lila looked at me, her face pale. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was a public display of dominance. I could feel the energy shifting around us, neighbors whispering, some filming with their phones, others deliberately avoiding eye contact, afraid they'd be next. I asked Judith to leave our property. She refused at first, but after I began recording her tirade on my phone, she muttered something about reporting us to the board and stormed off, heels clicking like gunshots down the sidewalk. That afternoon, things went from surreal to sinister. Lila's school counselor called. They'd received an anonymous tip, concerns about her emotional safety and whether she was being forced to live in a non-permissive environment. CPS had been notified. Lila was pulled aside during her free period and questioned about her living situation, her mental health, and whether she felt safe at home. She was blindsided and humiliated, and it was clear from the language used that the complaint had come from someone trying to portray her home life as dangerous or unstable. There was no mystery. Judith had made her move. Not content with public shaming and fake eviction threats, she'd now turned to false accusations and character assassination. When Lila came home that evening, she was quieter than usual. She sat at the kitchen table and stared at her untouched dinner, the gears in her mind visibly spinning. "She's trying to break me," she whispered. "She wants me gone." I nodded slowly. "She wants to scare you into leaving. If she can't control who lives here, she'll find a way to remove them." Lila looked up at me. "What did I do wrong?" I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Absolutely nothing." That night, I sent a formal complaint to the HOA's legal department. I outlined the harassment, attached recordings, screenshots, and copies of the letters. But I knew how these boards worked. They were incestuous, click-driven, slow-moving. Judith had allies, and she wasn't afraid to flex her authority in ways that towed the line of legality, but dipped fully into moral corruption. The next morning, I received a reply. "Your concerns have been noted and will be reviewed by the Compliance Subcommittee in due course. In the meantime, please be advised that any further non-compliance will result in additional fines." That was it. No acknowledgement of the harassment. No investigation into the abuse of power. Just more veiled threats. But I wasn't the only one reaching a boiling point. That Friday, as Lila sat on the porch defiantly with her homework and her earbuds back in, Judith returned. This time, she brought 2 other HOA board members with her. Ken Myers, the elderly vice president who only showed up for free donuts at meetings, and a woman named Brenda who rarely spoke more than 5 words at a time. The 3 of them stood at the end of the walkway, arms folded like a tribunal. "Mr. Sanders," Judith called out, "this is your final warning." I came outside with my phone recording again. "Unless your daughter vacates the premises immediately, you will be charged $500 per day, retroactive to Monday. We are authorized to contract private enforcement beginning next week." I laughed bitterly. This is her home. You can't evict a child from her legal residence. You're out of control. Judith stepped forward. We are cleansing this neighborhood of disruptive influences, she hissed that word. Cleansing. It hung in the air like a toxin. There was silence on the block. No one moved. No one spoke. Then the screen door across the street creaked open. Old Mrs. Petrov, our 76-year-old neighbor with the bad hip and the soft voice, shuffled onto her porch. Judith, leave that girl alone, she said clearly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Judith turned, startled. This doesn't concern... It concerns all of us, Mrs. Petrov interrupted. That child mowed my lawn last summer when my son was in the hospital. She helped me fix my bird feeder. She's a good girl. Other doors opened. A few more neighbors stepped out, hesitant but curious. Brenda looked uncomfortable now. Ken adjusted his tie nervously. Judith narrowed her eyes. We will not tolerate insubordination, she snapped, but her voice had lost some of its bite. She turned abruptly and stormed away, her backup trailing awkwardly behind her. That night, Lila and I sat under the stars on the porch. We didn't say much. The air felt heavy but also hopeful. Something had shifted. People were starting to see what Judith was doing. And as the neighborhood watched her spiral deeper into obsession and abuse of power, I could feel a reckoning building in the distance. Quiet at first, but steady. Judith had made this personal. She had made it political. But she hadn't yet realized what it meant when the people she thought she ruled started fighting back. The clipboard she clutched like a scepter? It wasn't going to protect her from the storm she'd created. The war had just begun, and the next chapter would not be written by her. 3 days had passed since Judith Harrington last stood on our porch, red-faced and defiant, clipboard trembling in her grip as she spat out threats like venom. The neighborhood had begun to shift since then, subtly but noticeably. The silence that once greeted her strolls had been replaced by awkward glances, sideways whispers, and an unmistakable chill that followed her like a shadow. People were tired. The fear she wielded was slowly being replaced with something else. Resolve. I spent those days gathering every document, recording, and witness statement I could, filing a formal complaint to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and forwarding a packet to a civil liberties attorney I'd contacted through a friend. I didn't know if anything would come of it. I wasn't expecting a miracle. But what happened next wasn't a miracle. It was accountability in motion. That morning began like most others. Coffee in hand, Lila getting ready for school, the sound of sprinklers clicking on down the street. I was reading emails when I noticed the unusual rumble of tires, different from the usual minivans and delivery trucks. A black SUV, tinted windows, federal plates. It turned into the cul-de-sac and rolled to a slow, deliberate stop in front of Judith's perfectly manicured front yard. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a dark blue suit, sunglasses shielding his eyes, a badge clipped plainly to his belt. He looked around once, expression unreadable, and began walking, directly past my house, past the Jacobsons' hedges, past Judith's signpost declaring "Neighborhood Watch enforced here," and straight onto her porch. I stepped out onto my own, heart pounding. Lila joined me, sensing something important was about to unfold. Across the street, curtains fluttered. Mrs. Petrov emerged slowly, arms crossed, gaze locked on the scene. The man knocked once, firmly. The door creaked open seconds later, and there stood Judith, wearing a silk blouse and a confused smile that vanished the moment she saw who was standing on her porch. "Judith Harrington?" the man asked in a voice loud enough for every nearby home to hear. "Yes," she replied, clutching the door frame. "Can I help you?" He handed her a sealed manila folder. "I'm Deputy Marshal Carter, United States Department of Justice. You are under federal investigation for harassment, abuse of authority, under civil organizational statutes, and multiple civil rights violations, including illegal eviction practices targeting minors." Judith's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no words came out for a few seconds. Then, with a nervous laugh, she sputtered, This is absurd. I don't understand. This must be some kind of mistake." Marshal Carter didn't flinch. "We have over a dozen official complaints, corroborated with video recordings, digital communication logs, and sworn testimonies from your community members. Your actions as HOA President have violated federal protections outlined in the Fair Housing Act and state-level housing statutes. You are being summoned for immediate questioning and possible detainment pending review." Phones were out. Across the cul-de-sac, I saw at least 4 people recording. The Jacobs, the Lee family, even grumpy old Mr. Allen had his phone raised as if witnessing the moon landing. Judith turned to look around and seemed to realize, probably for the first time, that she wasn't feared anymore. She was exposed. "You don't understand," she stammered, clutching the folder like a lifeline. "I was trying to preserve community standards. These people, these children, they don't follow the rules. I was protecting the neighborhood." Marshal Carter stepped aside and gestured calmly toward the street. "Ma'am, I suggest you speak with your attorney. You'll have the opportunity to explain everything in a formal setting. Please step outside." She hesitated. She glanced back inside, as if searching for a way to slam the door and pretend this wasn't happening. But the moment was gone. Whatever authority she once held had crumbled like brittle leaves in the wind. Slowly, Judith stepped forward, hands trembling slightly, her posture still stiff with pride but her eyes revealing panic. The marshal guided her gently toward the SUV. No cuffs yet. Just the quiet procession of justice walking a woman who thought herself untouchable toward a reckoning long overdue. As they drove off, the silence that followed was almost reverent. Then murmurs began to rise, first quiet, then louder. Mrs. Petrov clapped once, solemn and satisfied. A few others nodded, their expressions a mixture of shock, relief, and quiet. Vindication. Lila looked at me, wide-eyed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this real?" I nodded. "It's very real." She exhaled, the tension she'd been carrying for weeks seeming to melt off her shoulders in that one breath. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "we rebuild." But even as the SUV vanished beyond the curve of the cul-de-sac, I knew this wasn't the end. It was a turning point. Judith wouldn't be back anytime soon, not with federal investigations underway, and her name now synonymous with abuse of power. But the damage she'd done had left deep cracks in the foundation of our community. We couldn't just sweep it away like fallen leaves. That afternoon, neighbors who had once whispered behind curtains came knocking. Some came to apologize. Others offered statements, testimonies, emails, screenshots, evidence of years of overreach and intimidation. We began collecting it all. What had started as one angry HOA president's crusade had now become a collective story of a neighborhood, reclaiming its voice. That evening, we sat on our porch again, Lila beside me, the air cooler now, freer. For the first time in weeks, she laughed, really laughed, when she scrolled through a community thread filled with Judith memes, hashtags like Bye Bye Karen and clipboard crimes trending locally. It was juvenile, it was petty, and it was healing. "You think she's really gone for good?" Lila asked. "Legally? Maybe not forever," I admitted. "But she's lost her grip, and we're not going back to how things were." She smiled. "Maybe we can start calling this place home again." I looked out at the street, calm, familiar, safe, and for the first time in a long while, I believed her. In the days that followed Judith's very public removal from her porch by a federal marshal, the atmosphere of our cul-de-sac changed, in ways that were both immediate and subtle. For the first time in what felt like years, neighbors smiled without nervous glances. The paranoia that had blanketed the community, an invisible but oppressive fog, began to lift. Judith Harrington was officially suspended from her duties as HOA President pending investigation, a phrase that echoed like a bell of freedom through our once muted streets. The official HOA bulletin board, once filled with citations and warnings, signed in her sharp penmanship, now stood blank except for a notice about a special community meeting. The timing couldn't have been more symbolic. That Saturday evening, a cool breeze floated through the neighborhood as people gathered in the community hall, a modest building we all paid for, but rarely used due to Judith's habit of hijacking every meeting with procedural jargon and veiled threats. This time, it was different. The chairs were filled to capacity. People brought their spouses, their children, even elderly parents who hadn't attended a meeting in years. There was something almost ceremonial about the turnout. I watched from the second row as hands went up one by one, not in fear, but with purpose. There was anger, sure. Years of resentment poured out as residents shared their stories of Judith's overreach. But there was also hope. For the first time, we weren't whispering complaints under our breath. We were standing together. The interim HOA chair, a soft-spoken accountant named Raj, who lived near the playground, moderated with calm and fairness. We voted to review all active fines and warnings issued under Judith's leadership. We established an independent compliance review committee, something unheard of in our HOA's history. But the most powerful moment came when the floor was opened for new proposals. I stood, cleared my throat, and introduced a motion for the creation of a neighborhood youth council. There was a short pause, then murmurs of interest. Our children live here too, I said. They deserve a voice in this community, and they deserve to know this is their home, not just a place where they're tolerated. I looked at Lila, who sat beside me, watching with a mixture of pride and disbelief. The motion passed overwhelmingly with near-unanimous support. It was a small win on paper, but symbolically, it was seismic. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. The power Judith once held through fear had collapsed like a house of cards. Sure, a few loyalists tried to claim she was misunderstood, that her intentions were pure, but they were drowned out by the collective memory of her tactics. Letters slipped under doors, fines for imaginary infractions. Teenagers followed home for walking too loudly. Judith herself tried to stage a comeback, issuing a statement through her attorney claiming she had been acting in accordance with community preservation interests, but no one was buying it. Her name had become synonymous with tyranny, a cautionary tale, a clipboard dictator brought down not by outrage, but by documentation and accountability. Her influence was gone, and in its place, something new was forming. Lila, once quiet and cautious, had found her voice through the chaos. The vlog she started, originally just a way to vent, suddenly found traction online. Her first video, titled "My HOA Tried to Evict Me for Being a Teenager," racked up thousands of views overnight. She spoke clearly, confidently, with the wisdom of someone far beyond her years, exposing not just Judith, but the systemic issues that allowed someone like her to thrive unchecked. She got messages from teens in other states, other communities, sharing similar horror stories. Local media picked up her story, then national outlets. Within a month, she was interviewed via Zoom on a youth rights podcast, and a major housing advocacy group reached out to collaborate on an awareness campaign. Watching her speak, head high, voice unwavering, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt hope. And as for me, I realized something I'd long forgotten in the daily rush of life. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stand still and let the truth speak. I hadn't fought back with aggression or threats. I'd collected evidence. I'd built a case. I'd believed in due process and community. And in the end, that was enough. I found myself drawn more into community affairs, not because I wanted power, but because I now understood how fragile justice can be when people stop paying attention. I helped lead bylaw revisions, making sure no vague clause could ever again be twisted to target children or marginalized residents. We hosted community potlucks. We reopened the park's bulletin board, not for fines, but for birthday announcements. Book clubs, lost pets. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to resemble the one I had moved into all those years ago, before it became a quiet battlefield of power and paranoia. Even those who had once sided with Judith began to show a kind of sheepish remorse. Some apologized directly. Others simply showed up with pies or awkward smiles, their presence a silent truce offering. I accepted them, not because I forgot, but because I believed in rebuilding. Lila's youth council hosted its first meeting in the same room where Judith once barked orders. 4 teens, including her, shared their ideas for making the neighborhood more inclusive. Free tutoring meetups, open mic nights, a community mural. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't flashy, but it was real, and it was theirs. The memory of Judith never completely vanished. Her name was still whispered occasionally, often in the same way people talk about a bad storm from years ago. But it was no longer spoken in fear. It was a reminder of what happens when good people stay silent too long, and what can happen when they choose to stand up instead. I sometimes wonder what she thinks when she drives by, if she drives by. If she sees the kids playing in the park again, the chalk art on sidewalks, the community garden with hand-painted signs made by Lila and her friends. If she realizes that control is no match for connection, that rules mean nothing without respect. As for Lila and me, we don't talk much about the eviction letter anymore. It sits in a folder somewhere, along with the videos and letters and screenshots that once felt like ammunition but now feel more like museum pieces. Artifacts of a battle hard fought. Instead, we talk about college, about her plans to maybe go into public policy, about her next video, and sometimes, late at night, when the streetlights flicker and the wind rustles the leaves, we sit on our porch swing and laugh, not because everything is perfect, but because we know what it took to earn this peace, because we stood our ground, because we made it home again, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who had been too afraid to speak until someone finally did. If this story moved you or reminded you of someone fighting against unfair treatment in their own neighborhood, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. We want to hear your voice, because your story matters too. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel, the HOA Stories, where real people stand up to real injustice, one neighborhood at a time. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next unbelievable story from behind the white picket fences. This isn't just about HOA drama. It's about reclaiming power, protecting family, and fighting back the right way. See you in the next story.